The wasteland was endless, a land of broken rocks and dry sand. The human walked slowly, his boots sinking into the ground, his breath white in the freezing air. Day had been harsh, with a burning sun and cruel winds. But night was worse, colder than death itself. He pulled his jacket tighter around his body, but it was too thin, not enough to fight the chill that crept into his bones. Every step was heavier, and every breath felt like glass cutting inside his lungs. He had been traveling for days, searching for shelter, searching for food, searching for anything that felt safe. But the wasteland had nothing to give. No trees, no water, no animals, only silence and the sharp bite of the wind. He thought maybe tonight would be the night he would not wake up, the night the cold would take him. Still, he forced his legs to move, because humans never gave up, not even in places where hope was thin as smoke. The land around him stretched empty, until he saw something strange in the distance. At first he thought it was a broken tent, a forgotten piece of fabric, left behind by some lost traveler. But as he came closer, his eyes widened, his heart beat faster. It was not fabric, not a tent, but a small figure curled up on the ground, wrapped in what looked like a torn sleeping bag. The human froze, watching carefully, because in the wasteland, nothing was ever simple, and nothing was ever safe. The figure stirred, and he saw it was alive. A girl, tiny, fragile, her skin faintly glowing under the pale moonlight. She had big eyes that shimmered like liquid silver, and her hair fell across her face in tangled strands. She looked weak, trembling as she tried to keep warm inside the thin sleeping bag. The human had never seen a creature like her before, but one thing was clear. She was not human. She turned her head, her eyes locking onto him. For a moment, neither of them moved, the silence heavy as stone. Then she whispered in a voice that shook with cold, yet carried a strange calmness. "You'll die tonight if you sleep alone." The human blinked, his heart jumping. Why would a stranger, an alien, say such a thing to him? He wanted to ask who she was, what she was doing here, why she looked so broken and lost. But the wind cut through his body, reminding him how cold the night truly was. The girl sat up slowly, holding the torn sleeping bag close to her body. Her small frame shivered violently. Yet she pulled at the fabric, showing there was just enough space for two. Her voice was quiet, almost pleading. "If you stay out there, you won't last until morning." The human felt suspicion rise inside him. What if this was a trick? What if she lured him closer so that someone else could strike? But when he looked into her silver eyes, he saw no trap, no cruelty, only fear and exhaustion. She was fighting the same cold he was, only she was smaller, weaker, and more fragile. The wasteland offered no mercy. The human knew that pride, fear, or hesitation could kill him faster than any blade. Still, his hand trembled as he stepped closer, his mind racing with doubts. Why would she share her shelter? Why would she care whether a human lived or died? And why did her voice sound so certain, as if she had seen others fall before him? He stood there in silence, his breath hanging in the air like smoke. The girl kept staring at him, her eyes soft but urgent, as if she already knew he could not refuse. His body ached. His teeth chattered, the frost biting into his skin. He realized that if he did not decide now, he might never see another sunrise. The girl pulled the sleeping bag open wider, her hands shaking as the cold air rushed in. Her small voice came again, almost breaking. "Please, come inside, before the night takes you too." It was not just an offer. It was a warning, one that felt heavy with truth. The human hesitated for one last moment, then slowly lowered himself to the ground beside her. The sleeping bag was rough, thin, but it was warmer than the open air. Their shoulders touched, their breaths mingled, and the cold that had been crushing his body eased just a little. The girl's skin gave off a faint warmth, strange but comforting. She pulled the torn fabric around them both, sealing them against the wind. For a long time, they said nothing, only listening to the storm howl outside. But inside the sleeping bag, two strangers lay side by side, sharing the thin barrier between life and death. The human stared into the darkness, wondering what kind of world he had stepped into, and why this fragile alien, who owed him nothing, had chosen to save his life. As his eyes grew heavy, her whisper reached his ears again, softer this time, almost like a secret. "You're safer now, but only for tonight." The words chilled him more than the cold ever could, because hidden in her voice was something he could not understand yet. Fear of tomorrow. And as the night dragged on, the human realized this meeting was no accident. It was the beginning of something that would change everything. The human lay stiff inside the torn sleeping bag, his body still trembling from the cruel cold. The alien girl beside him was so small, he could almost wrap one arm around her entire frame. Yet despite her fragile body, she gave off a strange warmth that pressed into him like a shield against the frozen wasteland. For a while, he stayed silent, listening to the howling wind outside and the racing beat of his own heart. But then he turned his head and whispered, "Why did you help me?" The girl's silver eyes flickered in the faint moonlight. Her lips moved slowly, as if the words were heavy and hard to release. "Because I know what happens when someone tries to survive alone here," she said, her voice calm but sad. The human frowned, realizing her words carried experience. As though she had seen it before. She had seen others freeze, others fall, others vanish into the endless night. He wanted to ask more, but she pulled the sleeping bag tighter around them, her small hands clutching the edges. "You're not safe yet," she added, her breath misting in the cold air. Her words carried an edge of fear that sent a chill deeper than the wind ever could. The human studied her face. Delicate, pale, with sharp features unlike his own. She looked younger than him, maybe no more than a teenager by human measure. Yet her eyes were ancient, full of pain. Her body trembled every few seconds, as though she was holding herself together only by willpower. Still, she looked at him with a strange determination, as if she had already decided something about him. Then she shifted closer, pressing against him more firmly. "You can't make it through the nights without me?" she whispered, her words so quiet he almost thought he imagined them. He stiffened at her closeness, his instincts warning him to be cautious. But her warmth was real, and the freezing air outside the sleeping bag was cruel. Her kindness made no sense, and yet it was the only reason his heart still beat. The girl's next words shocked him more than the cold ever had. "I will share this sleeping bag with you, every night, until you are safe," she said firmly. Her voice was fragile but filled with something strange. An oath, a promise, maybe even a bond she had no right to give. The human blinked, his throat tightening. "Why would you do that for me?" he asked, his voice harsher than he meant. Her silver eyes shimmered as she answered, "Because if I don't, you will die, and I don't want that." Her words struck him like a blade. No one had spoken to him like that in years, not since he had left home. Here, in this cruel wasteland, where survival meant thinking only of yourself, this alien girl was offering him her only protection. It was so simple, yet it felt like a gift far greater than he deserved. His mind spun with questions. Who was she? What had she lost? And why was she so willing to save a stranger? He lay silent for a long time, his eyes staring into the torn fabric above them. The girl's breathing was soft, but he could hear her teeth chattering beneath it. Even with the sleeping bag, even with their bodies pressed close, she was still freezing, still fragile, still breaking. Yet she gave half of her warmth to him without hesitation. It made no sense unless she needed him too. "Is this some trick?" he whispered at last, suspicion creeping in. Her head shook quickly, her hair brushing against his shoulder. "No trick, only truth," she said. "You need me, and I need you," she added, her voice trembling now. The human narrowed his eyes. "Why do you need me?" For a moment she stayed quiet, then her lips parted, her voice so low it was almost swallowed by the wind. "Because they are coming, and I cannot run anymore." The human's breath caught. The sleeping bag suddenly felt smaller, the night heavier. "They," he repeated. "Who are they?" But she did not answer, not yet. Her eyes closing as if the weight of her words had already drained her. The night dragged on, long and merciless. But the human could not sleep. Her words repeated in his mind, circling like ghosts. You can't make it without me. They are coming. I cannot run anymore. Every whisper, every tremble, every look in her silver eyes told him one thing. This girl was not just surviving in the wasteland. She was hiding, and by sharing her shelter, by taking her warmth, he had stepped into something larger than he understood. When morning light finally touched the wasteland, weak and pale, he stirred. The girl was still curled against him, her face soft in sleep, her small hand clutching the torn edge of the sleeping bag as if afraid he would slip away. For a moment, the human simply stared at her. She was a stranger, an alien, a fragile being in a world that wanted her gone. Yet she had given him life when death was certain. As he rose, she woke, her eyes meeting his at once. You survived, she said softly, almost with relief. The human nodded, his throat dry. Then she added the words that sealed his fate, the words that would follow him far beyond this wasteland. Tonight, and every night after, you must stay with me. The human froze, his chest tightening. Her words were not a request. They were a command wrapped in kindness. And though part of him wanted to resist, another part knew the truth. He was alive only because of her, and walking away now might mean death. As the wind picked up again, the human realized something else, something even more dangerous than the cold. This tiny alien girl had tied his survival to hers, and whether he liked it or not, his life was no longer his alone. The wasteland morning was pale and cruel, the sky covered with gray clouds that promised no warmth. The human stretched his stiff arms, his body still aching from the cold night, but alive, alive only because of her. Beside him, the tiny alien girl stirred slowly, her silver eyes blinking open, her breath misting softly in the air. She looked at him, almost shyly, then pulled the torn sleeping bag tighter around her small frame. For a long moment, they only stared at one another, two strangers forced together by the hunger of the night. The human wanted to thank her, but the words caught in his throat. Instead, he asked something else. Who are you? The girl lowered her eyes, her thin fingers twisting the fabric of the sleeping bag. My name is Lyra, she whispered, her voice carrying both fear and pride. She spoke it as if daring the wasteland itself to hear, as if her name was something dangerous to say. Lyra? The human repeated quietly, the sound of it strange but soft on his tongue. She nodded once, then looked at him with those silver eyes, eyes that seemed too large for her face. And you? She asked. What do they call you? Daniel, he answered after a pause. Just Daniel. For the first time since they met, her lips curved into a faint smile, a fragile spark of warmth in the endless cold. As they began walking together, the land stretched empty in all directions. The ground cracked beneath their boots. The wind carried dust that stung their eyes. But somehow, walking with her made the wasteland feel less endless. Her small steps struggled to keep up with his, yet she never asked him to slow down. And each time she stumbled, Daniel found his hand reaching out, steadying her before she fell. When the sun began to set again, Lyra spoke softly. You wonder why I trusted you? Daniel glanced at her, startled, because it was true. The question had haunted him since last night. Her gaze stayed forward, her expression distant. My people. They see humans as dangerous, greedy, violent, she said, her words trembling. They say humans only take, never give. Daniel frowned at her words, but she wasn't finished. Yet when I saw you, she continued, you looked more lost than me. Her voice softened, almost like a confession. And I thought, maybe if you held on, maybe I could too. Her honesty struck him harder than the cold ever had. This girl had been running, hiding, and yet she had seen something in him worth trusting. That night, when the freezing air returned, Lyra once again opened the torn sleeping bag. Daniel hesitated for only a second before lying down beside her. The closeness was uncomfortable at first, his body tense, his thoughts racing, but the warmth spread quickly, seeping into his frozen skin, and as the night stretched on, he felt her shivering lessen, her breathing grow softer, steadier, calmer. "Does this bother you?" she asked quietly in the dark. Her voice was fragile, as though she feared rejection. Daniel turned his head toward her, though he couldn't see much in the blackness. "No," he said finally, his voice rough but honest. "It doesn't bother me." She sighed softly, almost like relief, and pressed closer against his chest. For a long time, silence ruled, only the storm outside filling their ears. But then Lyra whispered again, her words trembling. "My people are gone," she said. "They were taken, scattered, hunted." Her voice cracked, and Daniel felt her body shake against him. "I've been alone for so long. I thought I would freeze one night and no one would notice." Daniel's chest tightened at her words, his breath heavy in the darkness. He wanted to say something to ease her pain, but no words seemed enough. So instead, he shifted his arm, wrapping it around her small frame, pulling her closer. Her body tensed at first, but then melted into his hold, as though she had been waiting for this simple touch all along. It wasn't much, just warmth, just human contact. But it was more than she had known in years. Lyra's voice broke the silence again, softer this time, almost like a dream. "You're the first person who didn't turn away from me." Daniel swallowed hard, his eyes burning though he blamed the cold. He wanted to tell her she wasn't a burden, that she wasn't alone anymore, but instead, he whispered something simpler, something true. "You're safe with me." The words felt heavy, like a promise he wasn't sure he could keep, but the way she clung to his arm, the way her trembling eased at his voice, told him those words mattered. For the first time in years, Lyra closed her eyes without fear, her breath slowing into the rhythm of sleep, and for the first time in days, Daniel felt his own eyelids grow heavy. The cold was still outside, the wasteland still endless, but inside that thin sleeping bag, there was something new, not just warmth of the body, but warmth of the heart. As the night deepened, Daniel realized something that made his pulse quicken. This girl was no longer just a stranger he stumbled upon. In one night, she had become his responsibility, his companion, maybe even his hope. And though he didn't know what hunted her, though he didn't know what tomorrow would bring, one truth burned inside him. He would not let her face the cold, or the darkness, or the hunters, alone ever again. The wasteland night was cruel again, darker than the last. The stars hidden behind thick clouds. Daniel and Lyra lay close inside the torn sleeping bag, the thin fabric the only barrier against the cold. The silence outside was heavy, broken only by the low whistle of the wind across the broken stones. Daniel tried to rest, but his eyes refused to close, his body tense with unease. Something about the way Lyra clung to him made his chest tighten, not just because of the cold, but because of something deeper. He turned slightly, trying to look at her face in the dim glow of her faintly luminous skin. Her eyes were shut, but her body trembled, her small hands clutching his sleeve as if she feared he might vanish. At first he thought she was simply cold, but then he heard it, the soft, muffled sound of her sobbing. His chest grew heavy, the sound cutting through him more painfully than the freezing air outside. He whispered, "Lyra, what's wrong?" Her silver eyes opened slowly, shining wet in the darkness. For a moment she said nothing, her lips pressed tightly as if the truth itself might kill her. Then her voice came, cracked and weak. "They'll find me." Daniel frowned, confusion flooding his thoughts. "Who will?" he asked, his voice steady but low. Lyra's body shook harder, her breath catching. "The hunters. They never stop. They never forget. They always come back." The word hunters made Daniel's blood run colder than the night. His hand tightened on the sleeping bag, his instincts screaming that danger was closer than he had imagined. "Hunters," he repeated slowly. "Why are they after you?" Lyra's gaze darted to the shadows around them, her voice no louder than a whisper. "Because of what I am," she said. "Because I was born different, and different things must be owned or destroyed." Daniel's jaw clenched, his fists curling inside the fabric. He wanted to demand more answers, but the fear in her eyes stopped him. She wasn't lying. Her terror was too raw, too sharp, too real. Instead he asked something else, his tone softer. "How long have they been after you?" Her lips trembled. "For as long as I can remember." The silence that followed was unbearable. Daniel had thought the wasteland was cruel enough, but now he realized the cold was not the true enemy. Something worse stalked this fragile girl. Something powerful enough to chase her across a world. Lyra buried her face against his chest, her whisper barely audible. "Please don't leave me. If you go, they'll take me. They'll make me disappear like the others." Daniel felt her words cut into his heart like blades. He had never asked to protect anyone, never wanted to carry someone else's fate. Yet here she was, pressed against him, trembling, begging, needing him. His voice came rough, but steady. "I won't leave you." Lyra's breath hitched, her eyes wide as she stared at him, searching for truth in his face. For the first time, Daniel realized the weight of his own promise. This wasn't just about surviving the night anymore. This was about standing against something he didn't understand. But one look at Lyra's fragile frame, her silver eyes filled with fear and hope, was enough. He couldn't abandon her, not now, not ever. Even if the hunters were real, even if they came for him too, he would not let her fall alone. Lyra pressed closer, her trembling slowing. "You don't understand," she whispered. "They're stronger than you, faster than you, more cruel than the cold." Daniel's voice hardened, his jaw set. "Maybe," he said, "but they don't have me yet." The fire in his voice made her blink, a faint spark of something different flickering in her eyes. Hope. For a moment, she allowed herself to believe in him. The storm outside grew louder, wind shrieking across the rocks. Daniel pulled the sleeping bag tighter, wrapping it around them both until there was no space between their bodies. He felt her breathing against him, slow and unsteady, but calming as she drifted toward sleep. Still, even as her eyelids grew heavy, she whispered one last warning. "They won't stop, Daniel. Not until they have me or I am gone." Her words echoed inside his head long after she closed her eyes. Daniel lay awake, staring into the shadows, his grip on her small form tightening. He knew she was right. Whatever hunted her would come, maybe sooner than he expected. But one thing burned inside him stronger than fear. If they wanted her, they would have to go through him first. And as the cold night dragged on, Daniel realized something that made his pulse race. Lyra wasn't just a lost girl in a wasteland anymore. She was the reason he would fight, the reason he would stand, the reason he would not give up. And though the hunters had haunted her for years, they had never faced a human like him. Not yet. Not until tonight's promise became tomorrow's war. The morning sun rose weakly, a pale glow struggling through the thick clouds above the wasteland. Daniel stretched his arms, his muscles sore, his mind heavy with the memory of Lyra's whispers from the night before. She had spoken of hunters, of a force that would never stop chasing her. And though Daniel had not seen them yet, he believed her. The look in her silver eyes, the trembling of her body, the pain in her voice. None of it had been lies, and now, as the wind shifted, he felt something in the air, a tension, a warning that danger was close. Lyra walked beside him, her small steps quiet but quick, her head lowered as though she was trying to make herself invisible. Daniel kept scanning the horizon, his eyes sharp, his chest tight with unease. The wasteland stretched wide, endless. Yet something about the silence felt wrong. It was too quiet, too still. Even the wind seemed to hesitate, as if holding its breath. Daniel had lived long enough to know what that meant. Something was watching them. By midday, Lyra stopped suddenly, her body stiff as stone. Her glowing eyes stared at the ridge of rocks ahead, her voice no more than a whisper. They found us. Daniel followed her gaze, and his blood ran cold. Dark shapes moved across the horizon, tall and broad, their outlines sharp against the gray sky. They weren't shadows, they weren't tricks of the light. These were the hunters. Daniel's fists clenched, his heart pounding like thunder in his chest. The hunters moved with precision, spreading out as if to cut off escape. Even from a distance, he could feel the danger in them, their movements cold, merciless, inhuman. Lyra's hand gripped his arm tightly, her nails digging into his sleeve. Her voice cracked. "They don't stop, Daniel. They don't stop until I'm gone." Daniel turned to her, his jaw hard, his voice steady. "Then we won't stop either." Lyra's eyes widened, fear and disbelief mixing in her silver gaze. "You can't fight them," she whispered, her voice trembling. "They'll kill you." Daniel looked back at the approaching hunters, his breath sharp. "Maybe," he said, "but they'll have to try." The hunters grew clearer as they came closer. Their bodies were tall, armored with strange plates that glistened under the dim sunlight. Their faces were hidden behind masks that resembled skulls, with glowing slits for eyes. Each of them carried long weapons, humming faintly, weapons that looked more alive than mechanical. They moved like predators, patient and confident, as though certain of their victory. Lyra pulled Daniel back toward the rocks, desperation in her voice. "We have to run. There's still time before they close in." Daniel nodded, though his body screamed to stand and fight. Survival came first, and she was too important to lose. He grabbed her hand firmly, their fingers locking together, and they ran. The wasteland floor cracked beneath their boots as they sprinted across the barren land. The hunters' voices carried through the air, a language Daniel couldn't understand, but the tone was sharp, commanding, like wolves calling the pack. Lyra's breath came fast, ragged, her small body struggling to keep pace, but she refused to let go of his hand. Daniel pulled her along, shielding her as bursts of energy struck the ground behind them, spraying dirt and fire into the air. The hunters were not just close, they were attacking. "Faster, Lyra," Daniel urged, his voice rough, his lungs burning, but she stumbled, nearly falling, her body too weak to keep up with his longer strides. Without hesitation, Daniel swept her into his arms, carrying her as he ran, her arms wrapped around his neck, her face pressed into his shoulder. "You'll collapse," she whispered, but he only growled back, "Not before you're safe." The rocks ahead offered shelter, a cluster of ruins from some long-forgotten structure. Daniel rushed toward them, his muscles screaming in protest, his vision blurring with effort. Behind him, the hunters moved faster, their weapons crackling, their voices rising in unison. Energy blasts tore through the air, striking the ground so close that the heat burned his skin. But he kept running, his grip on Lyra tighter than ever. They dove behind the ruins just as another blast shook the rocks. Daniel set Lyra down gently, his chest heaving, his body trembling from the weight of exhaustion. Lyra's silver eyes were wide with fear, tears brimming as she clutched his arm. "They'll never stop," she whispered. "They'll tear everything apart until they have me." Daniel wiped the sweat from his brow, his voice iron. "Then they'll find out what happens when they chase the wrong human." The hunters slowed their advance, surrounding the ruins like predators circling prey. Their masked faces turned toward the shadows where Daniel and Lyra hid. The silence broke as one of them spoke, its voice metallic, cold, filled with command. "Give us the girl," it called, "and we will let you live." Lyra froze, her face pale, her body shaking violently. Daniel looked at her, then at the shadows beyond the rocks. The choice was clear but heavy. He could leave her, save himself, and the hunters would walk away. But the thought of her silver eyes fading into despair, of her trembling alone in the hands of monsters, was unbearable. His voice rang out, strong and defiant. "You'll have to kill me first." The wasteland fell silent again, the hunters pausing as if surprised by his defiance. Lyra stared at him, her lips parting in shock, her tears spilling freely. No one had ever spoken for her like that. No one had ever stood between her and the hunters. Her whisper trembled in the darkness. "Why, Daniel, why would you risk yourself for me?" But Daniel only clenched his fists, his eyes fixed on the enemies beyond, because deep inside he already knew the answer. The ruins shook as another blast of energy struck the stones, shards flying across the ground. Daniel ducked low, his arm shielding Lyra's small frame as the air burned with heat. The hunters were closing in, their voices echoing like metallic drums, their weapons humming with deadly power. Lyra trembled against him, her silver eyes wide, her breath sharp with terror. Daniel's heart pounded, but his jaw tightened. If they stayed here, they would be cornered, trapped, destroyed. "We can't fight them," Lyra whispered, her voice shaking. "Not like this." Daniel nodded, his mind racing. "Then we run," he said, his tone like iron. He grabbed her hand, pulling her toward a gap in the broken wall. The hunters fired again, energy crackling across the ruins, tearing holes where they had just stood. Lyra stumbled, but Daniel pulled her forward, refusing to let her fall. They burst out into the open wasteland, the wind howling against their faces. The hunters roared behind them, their heavy steps pounding like thunder against the cracked earth. Daniel ran hard, every muscle screaming, his breath burning his throat. But the hunters were relentless, their strides longer, their weapons faster. The wasteland lit with bursts of energy as blasts struck the ground on either side of them, sending waves of fire and dust into the air. "Keep going," Daniel shouted, his voice raw. Lyra gasped, her legs barely carrying her. But she didn't let go of his hand. She stumbled again, and Daniel scooped her into his arms without slowing. Her arms wrapped around his neck, her small body pressed against him, trembling but holding on. "You'll collapse," she whispered. "You'll burn out." Daniel gritted his teeth. "Not before I get you safe." The hunters' voices grew louder, closer, their strange language ringing in the wind. Daniel could feel the heat of their weapons chasing his heels, the ground exploding behind him. The ruins faded into the distance, and ahead, he spotted something. Twisted metal half buried in the sand, the wreckage of an old ship, its frame broken but still standing tall like a jagged shelter. Daniel's chest tightened with hope. "There," he said, his voice desperate. "We'll make our stand there." He sprinted harder, every step a war against his own exhaustion. His vision blurred, sweat stung his eyes, but he refused to stop. Lyra clung to him, her glowing eyes locked on the wreckage ahead. She could hear the hunters closing in, their weapons primed, their shadows stretching across the sand. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice cracking. "They won't stop. They'll tear you apart." Daniel's voice came like a growl, fierce and unshaken. "Then let them try." His legs gave a final push, and they dove inside the wreckage just as another blast struck. The metal frame shook violently, sparks flying as the shot ricocheted off the remains of the hull. Daniel set Lyra down gently, his chest heaving, his arms trembling from the weight of carrying her. The inside of the ship was dark, the air thick with rust and dust, but it was shelter, walls between them and the hunters. Daniel pressed Lyra against a corner, crouching low as the shadows of their pursuers grew closer. The hunters spread out, their voices echoing, metallic and cold. They circled the wreck, moving slow, patient, like predators toying with their prey. Lyra grabbed Daniel's sleeve, her eyes shining with tears. "You should have left me," she whispered, her voice breaking. "They only want me, not you." Daniel turned his head sharply, his gaze burning. "I don't abandon people," he said firmly. "Not you, not ever." Her lips trembled, her breath catching. "But why? Daniel, why risk everything?" For a moment the question cut through the chaos. Daniel stared at her, his chest rising and falling, the fire in his heart stronger than the fear in his veins. His answer came rough but certain. Because I can't watch you be taken. Because I'd rather die than let them break you. Lyra's eyes widened, tears spilling down her cheeks. No one had ever said such words to her before. No one had ever chosen her life over their own. The hunters' shadows stretched across the metal walls, their footsteps heavy. Daniel clenched his fists, every muscle tense, ready for the fight he knew was coming. Lyra's small hand slid into his, her fingers trembling but strong. "You're a fool," she whispered, but her voice carried something else, something warm. "You're a fool, but you're mine now, aren't you?" Daniel looked down at her silver eyes, glowing bright even in the dark wreckage. He didn't answer with words, but his grip on her hand tightened, unbreakable. Outside, the hunters prepared for the final strike, their weapons crackling with deadly energy. Inside, two strangers leaned into each other, bound not by blood or species, but by something stronger, the will to survive together, and the promise that neither would face the darkness alone again. The wreck shook as the hunters unleashed their power. But Daniel did not flinch, and Lyra did not let go. The wasteland wanted them broken, the hunters wanted them captured. Yet in that moment, Daniel knew one thing with absolute certainty. They would escape, not because the path was easy, but because he would never stop fighting for her. The wreckage groaned under the weight of the blasts, sparks showering down from broken beams. Daniel pressed Lyra against the wall. His arms braced on either side of her, shielding her from the storm of fire outside. The hunters' voices echoed like thunder, commanding, merciless. Their weapons ripping holes into the metal hull. Dust rained from above, the air choking with heat and smoke. Lyra's silver eyes shone through the haze, wide with fear, yet fixed on Daniel as if he was her last anchor to life. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice trembling. "They'll break through soon. We can't hold them here." Daniel's chest rose and fell hard, his muscles aching from exhaustion, his mind racing for answers. He knew she was right. The wreck would not stand much longer. But surrender was not in him, not now, not ever. "We'll find a way out," he said, his voice steady. "I'll get you through this, I promise." The wall exploded as another blast struck, the force throwing Daniel and Lyra to the floor. Pain shot through his side, but he pulled her close, rolling behind a fallen beam for cover. The hunters advanced, their dark silhouettes framed by the firelight, tall and merciless. Lyra clutched Daniel's arm, her small body shaking violently. Tears streaked her face as she whispered, Why don't you leave me? You could still live if you gave me up." Daniel turned sharply, his eyes burning with fire. "Because I don't leave people behind," he growled. "Not you, not anyone." His words shook her, the truth of them cutting through her fear. She had lived her whole life expecting to be abandoned, expecting to be unwanted, and now this human, this stranger, stood against death itself just to keep her safe. The hunters spread out, their glowing eyes piercing the smoke. One of them spoke in its cold, metallic voice. "Give us the girl, human, and we will spare you." Daniel's jaw clenched, his fists curling. His voice rang out like a blade. "You'll have to kill me first." The air fell silent for a heartbeat, the hunters pausing as if weighing his defiance. Lyra's tears fell harder, but this time they weren't only from fear. Her whisper cracked the silence. "You're mad," she said. "Mad? But you're mine now, aren't you?" Daniel glanced at her, his chest heaving, and without words he tightened his grip on her hand. It was answer enough. The hunters lunged, their weapons blazing. Daniel grabbed a broken metal pipe from the wreckage, the only weapon he could find. He swung it hard, sparks flying as it clashed against an energy blade. The force nearly tore it from his grip, but he held firm, shoving the hunter back. Behind him, Lyra cried out, her small voice cutting through the chaos. "Daniel, this way." She pointed to a crack in the hull, narrow but open, a path to the wasteland beyond. Daniel fought with every ounce of strength, slamming the pipe against the nearest hunter. Then he seized Lyra's hand, dragging her toward the gap. The hunters fired again, beams slicing through the wreck, but the blast missed them by inches. Together they dove through the crack, rolling into the open night. The cold air hit them like knives, the wasteland wide and merciless. But Daniel pulled Lyra to her feet, his voice fierce. "Run!" They sprinted across the sand, their shadows long under the firelight. The hunters roared behind them, their heavy steps shaking the ground. Energy blasts lit the night, chasing them, striking the earth around their feet. Daniel's lungs burned. His body screamed with pain, but he never let go of Lyra's hand. She stumbled, but he lifted her, half carrying her as they pushed forward. Her silver eyes filled with tears, but this time they were mixed with something new, hope. For the first time, she wasn't running alone. For the first time, someone was choosing her. They found shelter in a canyon, narrow walls shielding them from the open fire. Daniel collapsed against the rock, his chest heaving, his arms trembling. Lyra dropped beside him, her body pressed close, her small hand clutching his shirt. For a long moment they said nothing, only listening to the hunters' distant roars echo through the wasteland. When silence finally came, Lyra turned to him, her voice fragile but steady. "You should have let me go," she whispered. "You risked everything." Daniel looked at her, his eyes dark but soft. "You think I could walk away after what we've been through?" he said. "You think I could leave you to die?" Lyra's lips trembled, her tears glistening in the pale moonlight. She pressed her forehead to his chest, her voice breaking. "No one has ever stayed for me, Daniel. No one but you." Daniel wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. The wasteland was still dangerous, the hunters still searching. But in that moment, nothing else mattered. He felt the warmth of her small body against his, fragile yet alive, and he whispered back, "You're safe with me, Lyra. You're not alone anymore." Her body shook, but her tears turned into quiet sobs of relief. That night, they huddled together again in the same torn sleeping bag. But this time it was not only for survival, not only for warmth. It was because something had changed between them, something unspoken but undeniable. Lyra curled against him, her silver eyes soft with trust, her voice a whisper in the dark. "You're mine now, aren't you?" Daniel closed his eyes, his hand gently brushing her hair. He didn't need to answer, because his actions had already spoken louder than words. The hunters would come again. The wasteland would test them. Danger would never truly end. But tonight, under the stars, two strangers had become something more. And Daniel knew, with absolute certainty, that his life had changed forever.